I grew up in the 80s, and so G.I. Joe was a huge influence on me, and it is actually one of my very first memories of anything. I think that watching cartoons with my little brother and then getting all of the toys was such a big part of my childhood and of my life before I was ever introduced to, miniatures games or role-playing games or anything like that. Our first minis game, we would set up these battles together and play and actually take turns in combat and role play, and we didn't even know we were doing it.
My first memory of the Power Rangers honestly comes from early teens. I was a big Voltron fan and Transformers fan and lots of big robots. And I remember coming home from school and surfing through and initially thinking that I had fallen on like a new version of Voltron because there was these different animals and they were all robots and it was this weird live action thing. And I just kind of sat there and got sucked into it for a second before I realized that it was a completely different show. I mean, yeah, still kaijus and everything. We were fighting against each other. And I kind of got hooked on the original series.
G.I. Joe came out in 1982, so by the time I started getting memories, G.I. Joe was already there. It was just always part of my life as long as I can remember. A vivid memory of G.I. Joe is that we didn't have cable and we didn't really get the proper reception on the channel that played G.I. Joe. I was watching it like I was watching scrambled pay-per-view. I guess really just my earliest memories of G.I. Joe and experience with G.I. Joe was already filling in the blanks, using my imagination along with what G.I. Joe was giving me to figure out what action was happening in the cartoon, and then, applying that to when I'm playing with the toys. Just everything I was doing with G.I. Joe from the earliest time I experienced with it was one part them telling me what G.I. Joe is, and one part me telling me what G.I. Joe is.
Distinctly, I remember my family couldn't afford a VCR. I don't think VCRs were even very prominent at the time. So I had an audio cassette recorder, and I would actually record the episode as it's playing on TV so I could listen to it again. And so even to this day, the first season of the cartoon, maybe the visuals I don't have a distinct memory of, but I can hear like one or two words, and I could tell you like 5 or 6 lines because I just played those tapes over and over when I was a kid. So those voices in particular are just seared into my brain. Those voice actors are just so iconic to me. When they said that Peter Cullen was doing Optimus Prime in the movies and in the subsequent cartoons, it's like, yes, that's my Optimus Prime. And even the same thing with Peter Welker and Megatron. It's like, oh yes, these are my voices. And it was like it's even like characters like Scatman Carruthers. I mean, passed too soon, but like that jazz is just so memorable to me, and it just I love the nuances and tweaks of how they brought their forms, and even when you can tell it's the same actor who's done like the 15th character in the episode, and they're trying to make it different, But I mean, it had Casey Kasem in it. I mean, it was such a wonderful lineup.
So I turned 10 in 1981. And in 1981, there was not a whole lot of entertainment aimed at girls that wasn't Barbie. So G.I. Joe was one of the few places that you could find lady heroes. So Lady J, Baroness, were kind of really important to me as people I saw on the cartoons.
Some of my first memories of G.I. Joe are my dad, who's a toy collector and has since moved on to collecting and doing all manner of antiques, coming home with, whatever he picked up from in his travels of looking for things that were worth money and picking up things that were cheap and being like, here's this new assortment of G.I. Joes. I'm just like, yay! And it was always, there were so many characters and there were so many different types of people that you could make, these crazy teams out of soldiers with all kinds of backgrounds and skin colors and diversity and things like that. And they could all work together to fight, the same 5 Cobra figures that were like, Cobra Commander in 2 different masks, and then like the 18 different various series of Cobra Soldier. It was a lot of fun, and it was always one of the highlights of my childhood was like, what's going to be the new toys that Dad brings back when he goes off on his trip?
My
earliest memories of Transformers. I was very much an 80s kid and actually an 80s teenager. So I was hooked on Transformers back then during the early cartoons and the movie at that time. And I owned all the toys. In fact, Transformers represented the last toys I would play with before I finally decided to put toys away and move on to other distractions like Nintendo and things like that. It was a bit of an unfortunate transition period for me and my mom, actually, because at the height of my Transformers fandom back then, when I was like 13 or whatever, I was beginning to phase out of playing with toys. And much to my mom's chagrin, she had invested heavily in Transformers that Christmas. And the very next summer, I was selling them all at the yard sale that summer. She obviously was not amused, and she's given me grief about that for years.
JS SAMBRANO, and I've been a writer on Transformers. So my first memory of Transformers is specifically watching the cartoon early in the morning on one of those tiny little old box televisions. The screen is probably this big. While taking a bath with my brother. So I don't know how old I was. I think that gives you an indication of how old I was. And just being like blown away with how cool it was that these robots were just like jetting through the sky and shooting missiles at each other.